Shalom, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Elana Heideman of the Israel Forever Foundation, and we do everything we can to bring to the global community of virtual citizens of Israel all over the world who identify as members of and friends of the Jewish nation and our ancestral destiny. We bring you together in virtual spaces because we understand just how hard it is for some people to find and be a part of a community in their local lives. This is a reality many are facing. And so our virtual discussions become a space where we can ask, learn, and connect with others, whether they are in our country or around the world. There is something that we all share. And among those elements is our desire to learn more and to dive deeper. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Rabbi David Wolpe, who is our special featured guest, to discuss a really important topic, which is while we are seeing hate rise all around us, and we're seeing people incite hate in every platform, even within the Jewish community itself, how do we hold haters accountable? It was once in a interview that Rabbi Wolpe shared that his most important lesson he gleaned from Elie Wiesel was when he said to him, "Don't let them get away with it." Rabbi Wolpe, thank you for being with us tonight. And
Thank
how do
you.
you today, after October 7th and everything we're seeing in the world, how do you today translate Elie Wiesel's words of wisdom?
So first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you again, and thanks everybody who's joining us. And I think that I'm going to start with the one of the most important. I won't say the most important, but one of the most important things people can do is to be nonpartisan in their calling out anti-Semitism wherever they see it, and not be, if you're on the right, not be blind to it on the right. If you're on the left, not be blind to it on the left. And I think that that's incredibly important for a couple of reasons. First of all, because otherwise you have no integrity, which should be enough, but also because you need to let people on all sides know that they can't get away with it because you agree with them on other political issues. And so I really, there are ways in which it goes under the radar in both ends of the political spectrum. And Jews, first of all, have to be really, really conscious and aware of of that creeping anti-Semitism on both sides, sometimes galloping, sometimes not just creeping. And the second thing that I would say is that I said this, I remember in our last podcast, we're so much better at identifying enemies than we are at embracing friends. And one of the ways you don't let people get away with things is you stand with your friends. And the Jewish people have a lot of friends. We sometimes act like we don't, but we really do. And also, if you don't make common cause with your friends, they get hurt. As though, why am I being your friend and standing with you if you don't look at me that way? And so I think that that's the other way, is that not only should Jews stand together, but they should link arm in arm with other people who will fight our fight with us and for us. So being willing to see enemies wherever they are, being willing to stand with friends wherever they are. I think they seem simple, but in practice, all sorts of other considerations, political considerations, religious considerations, all those things get in the way. And I think we have to be clear-eyed about it.
It's very interesting to have that be the onset to our discussion, which is how do we create the connections that we need in order to feel strong in our own positions. But sometimes even when we have allies, we don't feel like we can call out the haters or find ways that we can actually hold them responsible and perhaps open their minds. What do you recommend for people when they are looking at holding them accountable. And again, in education systems, in our religious networks, all of these networks have been infiltrated by
Yeah.
haters of Israel in one way or another. Some believe that their hate is justified. How do we hold them accountable in your mind?
Oh, Elana, they all think their hate is justified. I've never met someone who hates who thinks their hate is unreasonable. They all think so. Um, so first of all, I would say that the different fields sometimes require different strategies, but also there's, and this is actually backed up by a bunch of statistics, including stuff that the ADL has done. There's a percentage, like 15% or so, of the people who hate Jews are completely incorrigible. That is, you will never change them. It doesn't matter what happens. They're hard and fast and absolutely immovable haters. Then there are people who have hateful beliefs, but actually don't have any intention of mistreating Jews. So I think a lot of Americans, for example, would take it for granted that the Jews run the banks, but that doesn't mean they would ever discriminate against Jews. That's just what they believe. And so we have to be strategic about anti-Semitic actions, beliefs that are potentially anti-Semitic, people who can be changed and people who can't. A lot of the can't be changed, not all, but a lot of the can't be changed on the left is also funded by people who have deep political interests in fostering Jewish hatred. The money from the Middle East, I recently asked somebody, without identifying him, because it was supposed to be a private briefing, but he was a four-star general. He knew the Middle East very, very, very well. And I said to him, like, explain Qatar to me. Because some people say they do good things, and some people say they're evil and do terrible things. And he said, they're both right. He said, Qatar plays a pragmatic game. They will, like, they'll put money on every table because they have so much money. They'll put money on every table. So whichever way the political winds blow, they will have an interest in that area. He said, that's how they operate. In a sense, what he was saying is they're completely amoral. They just want to be sure that they're okay. But there are other regimes that are deeply ideologically anti-Israel, as we know, Iran being the most malign example, but not the only one. And a lot of the students, for example, who fomented unrest on college campuses were either from or funded by the Middle East. And those people, you're just not going to change. And so you have to at least expose what their motivations are. And I think that that's part of what's happening, by the way, in Europe, is that people are starting to see that there is a contingent of people who come from the Middle East who are really malign actors throughout Europe. And we'll see how much, whether European antibodies are sufficient to kick in to recover from that or not. We shall see. I mean, one of the many, many questions involved in all this is how much cultural self-confidence does the West still have? And the way we build those antibodies, of course, is by teaching our children that, yes, the West is far from perfect. And yes, we have done terrible things. But given that human beings will always create imperfect structures, the West is truly, a beacon of light in human history. And you should not give up on it. And it really, the interests of the Jews and the interests of the Western world are very much aligned. And then finally, maybe not finally, but at least a different, is that Jews have to do exactly what we're doing. That is, I don't know what helps, what doesn't, but you have to constantly, through lawfare, through speaking up, through every means possible, keep letting people know that this is not, we are not going to be quiet. We're not going to be cowed. We're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to be silenced. This is not the the Jew of Eastern Europe who felt like they didn't have a means to really assert themselves, or that they didn't have equal standing in the society. That's not the case anymore. And so every platform where Jews can reach out, I think it's important to do so, and especially to encourage Jews who have platforms like in Hollywood, who are sometimes abysmally cowardly. There are many like shining exceptions, as you know, Deborah Messing, Jerry Seinfeld, Scooter Braun. There are like some really wonderful counterexamples, but there are also a lot of people who, David Schwimmer, a lot of people who could speak up and don't. And you just think like, what did you win all this fame and influence for? Just so you could have a nice house in Malibu? Anyway.
But I think part of the problem is the fact that they don't know how to not let the others get away with it. What do we mean by that? Do we mean giving them some sort of, it's not just like saying, okay, we're going to keep going and we're going to keep doing, but what else in terms of holding them accountable? We know that some people are being, they're being arrested and then released after their involvement in incitement to terror. What kind of accountability and what kind of responsibility could we, common, normal Jews, not the celebrities, and not with endless resources, we find disappointment in most of the organizations who are claiming to fight. How can we, or worse, we see those organizations too. So how do you hold them accountable?
One of the things you do, which is really important, is you elevate the political candidates who are clear and unambiguous about this. I've been very pleased to see the profile of people like John Fetterman and Richie Torres be elevated, and it's not from the organized like leaders of the party. It's because they have grassroots support, because people say, oh look, people with real moral clarity who do not back down. And so here's where I feel a little conflicted, but just a tiny bit. Like, part of me feels like, don't drive yourself nuts by reading the news every day, which will just drive you nuts. And as a rabbi, I want people to have a certain amount of peace in their soul. And so like turning away from the news sometimes is really good. And on Shabbos, you shouldn't read the news. But on the other, Jews really need to know who feels what and who acts which way. And so we can't afford, especially right now, to turn away too much. And those candidates and those figures who you think are going to be warriors against Jew hatred, we have to help them and support them in one way or another. Again, I'm really nonpartisan about this stuff. I don't care what side of the aisle they're on, matters not to me at all. I really think that this is an urgent question, and that's what average citizens can very much do.
One distinction that you're making is you're suggesting to raise up the voices of those who are the advocates and the allies in our fight.
Right.
How often are we?
Wait, someone just wrote Fetterman supports Israel. That was my point. That was exactly what we want to elevate. Yeah.
And others, and people will say, well, we don't need to know about the Republicans who support Israel. That's a given. It's not actually a given. Nothing is a given. But on the reverse side, we know that, for example, there are rabbis who are equating Trump with Hitler in public forums, and members of congregations being completely outraged, but totally incapable of doing anything to stop that kind of spread of, populism and fear mongering. And how would you call out the haters even from within our circles?
Let me say this. First of all, I cannot emphasize this enough. Only Hitler was Hitler. Nobody should be compared to Hitler. Nobody. And no one should be compared to Nazis. People are not going around shoving Jewish children into ovens by the millions. I mean, so it's such historical idiocy to compare people to Hitler. It drives me nuts, as you can see. I don't get angry very easily, but this kind of comparison really, really angers me. And you can have like profound objections to political candidates. They're still not trying to destroy all the Jews in the world and planning to build museums for a dead people when all the Jews are dead. So please stop with the Hitler analogies, and try to be strategic in your criticisms and your support. Nobody is all black, nobody is all white. Half of Americans voted for two different candidates. Neither candidate, therefore, is the devil. I mean, half of your citizens are not complete idiots. So try to figure out why someone supports this or that or the other. And there are a lot of things on both sides that I have strong objections to. But I try again to say, for example, like when at the beginning of the war, Biden's support and empathy, I lavished praise on because I thought it was wonderful. When Trump did the Abraham Accords, I lavished praise on him because I thought it was wonderful. And I didn't care right or left. And I don't care right or left when it comes to Jewish causes. I just care that the person helps. And I'm dismayed that people won't make any distinctions between other issues and this issue. You can say he being whoever you want, she is doing all these terrible things, and I will object to it. But this is good. That's like, read the Talmud. It does it all the time.
So maybe that's one of the pieces of advice that we have to help others navigate that by saying, I'm going to call you out for what I don't think is okay, but not negate your entire ideology by claiming that it's illegitimate. I think that that's what a lot of people are feeling is happening to Jews, that we are being negated for our especially pro-Israel / Zionist Jews, who are also being targeted by anti-Israel Jews in their community and therefore increasingly silenced. So if we take your advice onward, we need to be able to really feel confident to have conversations that are uncomfortable.
I think that that's true, that you have to have uncomfortable conversations. And I was just thinking, like, remember when Elie Wiesel said to Reagan, this is not your place. He criticized him for going to visit the graves of Nazi soldiers. And it was a very powerful moment of criticism, one of the most like in your face criticisms of an American president, right to Reagan's face. But he never said Reagan was a bad man. Nobody should care about Reagan. Everything Reagan does is terrible. In other words, when Reagan did something that Wiesel deeply objected to that referred to the Jewish people, that's when he spoke. But he didn't do exactly what you said people shouldn't do, which is do these broad brushes of all Republicans are bad, Reagan is bad. It's once you say about someone, this person is Hitler, just as an example, you have made it impossible to influence them or anybody who ever supports them. Because I'm not going to listen to someone who thinks I support Hitler. If you thought I support Hitler, you think I'm going to listen to any other opinion you have about me? So we also
see
make
more and more people are supporting Hitler publicly and taking things to the extreme, and we are incapacitated. People don't know, what do I do with this so that I can counter that?
So what you do is you attack the view and the person who espouses an anti-Semitic view, but you don't broad brush people, as you just said, because then what you've done is you've made the people who listen to you happy, but the people that you want to persuade, you've made it impossible to talk to them. We have lost the art of being able to talk to people who disagree with you.
Very much so. I think entirely this is a major issue for the younger generation, especially. You have no idea how to navigate these kinds of conversations. Let's take it away from the Hitler correlation and put it in the modern. Well, I used it as an example because even today, so you have Bibi is Hitler and you have Israeli soldiers as the Nazis, and
Right.
you have this real dilemma of, for example, the glorification of terror and terrorism by our own community, by many elements of the Jewish community, and leaving the Hitler or Nazi associations out of it. It's actually, they are following those same insightful patterns, but they get away with it because they're Jews too. How do you cope with that?
So it's a very difficult dilemma, the anti-Zionist Jews. And and I say it's a difficult dilemma in part because they tend to be young, not exclusively, but they tend to be young. And that means that there's also the factor of the degree to which they will grow out of it. And sometimes you hold views when you're 20 that, when you're 50, you're ashamed of. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that I think about is that they don't actually realize the enormity of having an Israel and what an Israel means and what it was to create an Israel. And most of them have not been there. And so I really try as best I can not to just dismiss them and to say they're the whole younger generation, but to listen and try, case by case by case, to try to reason with them and try to open their minds. And even if I don't manage to persuade them in the moment, to plant some seeds that they can grow with. And look, I'm constitutionally optimistic. I am hopeful that in time will help. But also, it's important, nonetheless, that you try, as I said, to give some chizuk, some encouragement, some rocket fuel under those who are younger, who are pro-Israel. And I know that there are initiatives, for example, I was just this morning texting with people about an initiative to do Zionist dinners for singles and things like that, so that they can build a community and find like-minded people and not feel like they're alone. And that's a really important factor. It was on campus too. I saw this at Harvard. The students would gather to the Hillel and to the Chabad house because they didn't want to feel alone. So.
Yeah, no, at Israel Forever, one of the things we've been putting out for years are Shabbat Talks programs, things that anybody can pick a topic and engage in a really meaningful and deep way. Do you think that most people feel capable of transmitting that even in a closed space? Do you think that people are growing in their confidence right now to call out this hatred? Or do you think that after such a long war, apathy is growing, indifference? It's just too much of a burden for me. Why should I get involved?
I haven't seen that yet. I mean, maybe it will happen in time, but I still think that a lot of people have come to Jewish awareness and are exploring Judaism and Jewish peoplehood in a way that they didn't before October 7th. And that really is open a lot. It's opened a lot of eyes and a lot of minds in the Jewish world. So and look, we are in some ways lucky in our choice of enemies because they're so antagonistic and angry and dismissive and awful in so many ways that when you're the subject of that attack, it makes you understand that, like, this is actually not about me, which is so important for Jews to understand, that anti-Semitism actually deeply has nothing to do with Jews. It's the pathology of the Jew hate. It's not, and that's why, like, if you say that Jews are, if Jews would act differently, I mean, Jews have been model citizens and they've been protesters and they've been on the left and they've been on the right. It's not about what Jews do. And the more that Jews see that and understand it, then they can sort of make a coalition of the reasonable. It's not even a coalition of Jews, it's like a coalition of the non-crazies, because anti-Semitism is a sort of madness. It's just a madness that recurs in so many generations. And so, yeah, I think Jews are still discovering how, look, it's true in my own case. Honestly, when I started out in the rabbinate, I did not think anti-Semitism was going to be a big thing in my rabbinate. And I did not realize that I was basically I basically just grew up in an extraordinarily cocooned and privileged generation. But it was all I knew. I heard about anti-Semitism, but only on 2 or 3 occasions growing up did I actually encounter it face to face. And so, I had, how about you?
I unfortunately, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I experienced it from a young age, and I think that people are expecting anti-Semitism to look one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
In my days when I was studying with Wiesel at Boston University was the onset 25 years ago. It was the onset of what is happening today, also still
Right.
on Boston University and every other campus, where what started as a trickle has grown over 2 decades to being very, very intense. And, I experienced anti-Semitism, but I also remember interviewing many of the survivors I worked with in my life who would say, what are people waiting for? They're waiting for more Jews to die before they'll wake up to it, or they're waiting for it to happen to them.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are really like, well, yeah, we know it's growing, but it hasn't touched me. An interesting story that just came to my attention yesterday was a young girl who was very, physically attacked in her school, in middle school. And the mother decided to go to the school and to hold a session with the whole school. And instead of leaving it to the school to do it, she got other parents involved and they created this program. And it was she said, very effective because they weren't being told by the administration what to do. It was coming from their own community themselves.
Right.
I think that that's a really important idea. Another one, because you mentioned the importance of having those uncomfortable conversations, which is that another student reported that somebody had done a presentation in class and it was filled with lies about Israel. There was Holocaust denial. It was really awful. And what they did was they contacted the school, the child directly, privately. They said, we would like to just let you know that this isn't actually true. And the student, the one who did, the young boy who did the presentation, he said he'd never heard about the Holocaust.
Wow.
And he had no idea. He was
Wow.
basically did research, on the internet, used Wikipedia, which has completely been co-opted
Yes,
by the anti-Semitic editors,
yeah. Yeah.
and now exposed for that. But we need more people involved in the editing of their lies, and we don't have enough people. We are a small nation.
Right.
But here was one mom and one daughter who said they're going to call this kid. He ended up asking the teacher to do another presentation to the class. And he said, I learned that everything I had been taught was lies based on a hatred of Jews.
So that's incredibly
that was an epiphany moment.
That's incredibly important because we have to remind ourselves that a lot of people who hold these views don't know anything. It's just like I say all the time to Jewish audiences, how much do you know about Nagorno-Karabakh? How much do you know about Kashmir? To some people, those are the most important places in the world. You think everybody knows about Israel, but they don't. Maybe they heard a stray thing like Israel's a terrible place, and so that's all they know.
But worse than that is that people will now excuse terror because they became convinced by the basic lie.
Absolutely.
And that's really
so last night I was at an event in Los Angeles where Rachel and John Goldberg-Polin spoke. And all I can say is, for those of you who don't know, I assume most of you do, their son Hirsch was taken captive and was eventually killed in Gaza. You can't hear these people talk. You cannot, and not be stirred by the humanity of both their humanity and courage, and also the absolute horror of what happened. And one of the stories that she told was, she said, look, I didn't realize, she got a meeting with the Pope, and she said, look, there are 1 billion Catholics. I felt enormously privileged that I had a meeting with the Pope. He has so much influence. He's so important. She said, and she said, I know this sounds stupid, but he doesn't watch TV and he doesn't watch videos. She goes, but I thought I have to show him the video of Hirsch's kidnapping. So I did. She goes, and he was clearly like shaken. And he said, that's terrorism. And terrorism is the negation of humanity. That was like his immediate response. And she thought, yes, like when you actually see it, when you know what this is about, it's really hard to come to any other conclusion. And so, yeah, part of this is just we have to spread the truth.
And feel confident in our knowledge to do that. I think that's
Yeah.
really one of the guidance, mentoring pieces I'm always sharing is we see throughout our social media reels of very well-spoken individuals who have really perfected the ability to shape the news and help us
Right.
digest it. And sometimes I've recommended to students of all different ages that I work with, read it. You can get a transcript of any video out there and you can memorize it. Because if you ever notice that the anti teams, they're always reading and screaming right. from their phones. And to a certain extent, people in, Jews who are pro-Israel, like, but I don't know what to say. And I don't know how to say it right. And I'm always like, then find somebody who you like how they've said it and learn the language. We can teach. It's like learning Torah. We have to keep reminding ourselves.
Let me make a suggestion. I'm about to do an event in Toronto with him, but those of you, especially who are younger or who have kids, send them to Jonah Platt's Instagram. He has short statements. I think it's called a Jew something. It's slipping my mind. What's that?
Being Jewish podcast.
Being Jewish podcast. Because he's young and he's concise and he's direct and he speaks really well to young people. So if you have a young person, like show them his Instagram, a couple of things that he says, those kinds of voices, as you say, because his voice is like, there are some, it's going to be really hard. I'm about to interview Douglas Murray on April 7th in New York, but it's really hard to imitate Douglas Murray. This English eloquence, he's fantastic, but it's hard to repeat all the things he says. But Jonah, who speaks as a young American, he's replicable for a lot of people, and he's really smart and really good. So yeah, those kinds of discoveries are very, very helpful. So
I definitely think that having role models that we can follow also in their thinking. One of the you mentioned Hirsch. And before we open it up now to questions from everybody, please do share your questions. Raise your hand. I already see 2 hands up. I do want to remind you, let's keep everybody's comments to a time limit so that we can make sure to fit in everybody. But I'll just say that when it comes to those phrases and those words that we have to remember, it is Hirsch Goldberg. His legacy lives on in so many ways. And he was empowered by something that he had learned through his studies and his family, which was the Viktor Frankl mantra of he who has a why to live for can outlast any how. And he had spoken with this in a brief encounter with a fellow hostage while in the darkness in the tunnels. And that was something that they had talked about. And when they were later separated, Or Levy, who was in that discussion, said those words kept him alive. Hirsch's words kept him going throughout over 450 days in captivity, 491, if I believe, was when he was released. And those words live on. And we have to have that why of saying we're not going to let the haters just spout their hate. We're going to find ways to hold them accountable. Make sure are kicked out of schools, and make sure that their green cards are taken away if they are spouting terrorism. Make sure that the lies are corrected by calling them out, making sure that we are even willing, and I've had to mentor people who are struggling within their families. How do they cope with a sister or a brother or a parent who is just brainwashed to hate Israel and to believe the lies that Israel is committing a genocide?
What I would like is
having an understanding of, you mentioned it before, their motivation. have your motivation, and be clear in how you're going to say what you're going to say. Go ahead, Rabbi.
I was going to say, make anti-Semitism as socially unacceptable as racism.
Amen. Amen. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've got a couple of hands up, and this is a global discussion. So thank you so much for your wonderful, wonderful input so far. Let's go ahead and take our first question. Bruce Rasner, let's hear your question. Go ahead. You can unmute your microphone.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. This might be a little ancillary to the main topic, but I'm having some considerable difficulty being very well read on the subject. I actually participated in forums. It astounds me that our Jewish leaders, there's about 30 or some in Congress, I haven't heard them talk about what's going on college campuses. Not at all. I haven't heard the leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, take a strong position.
Oh, he's just published a book about anti-Semitism. He absolutely has, about what's going on college campus. And some of the other Democrats have. But in other ways not. So it varies which one and how.
And how? I think that's the real, you know, you'll hear them call it out, but then you'll hear them. You mentioned at the very, very beginning the idea of almost a two-faced. What are they saying to my face, and what are they saying behind my back? Unfortunately, that's the reality in diplomacy and politics all the time. I think that, you know, Bruce, it's important to recognize that somebody like Chuck Schumer, and we have several very, I would say, on the verge of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, because they are continuously needing the social acceptance of their own political leaning, where their position.
Yes, Schumer has been disappointing in other ways, but yeah, it's complicated. Not the legacy we would ideally have wished, but some have and some haven't, and it's exactly as Elana says. They're catering partly to a constituency that they're afraid does not share some of their views, which is why it's so amazing to see someone like Torres, who comes from a district that has no Jews and doesn't really have an Israel position, but because he's strong, he's firm, and he cares about his people, he's incredibly popular. And I just wish, as you say, that others would learn that lesson. You know?
And
Go ahead, Bruce.
If I could just add this, it's difficult enough with all that said, but we have some Jewish organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace that are giving great cover to the anti-Semites out there. That all these people are Jewish, and the label would suggest they're Jewish and they're otherwise supportive. It's just remarkable.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's infuriating and heartbreaking all at once.
I think the essential element for holding so-called Jewish organizations like that accountable is making sure that we call them out in every instance, and we create local campaigns to counter the lies that they spread. Jewish Voice for Peace is neither Jewish nor for peace. It is simply a channel for promoting terrorism as a legitimate form of resistance. I think that if not now, and others, and including even J Street, they walk a fine line, and it requires individuals to do more and to take action. But you know what? That requires us to step out of our own comfort zone of our daily grind. I think that's the big challenge. A lot of people don't want to be in politics or get engaged with those issues. So I would also suggest looking in your local community. How can you encourage people to see why they could do more to change the dynamic of the political diatribe that is happening? Because it's also happening in local civic engagement, not just in Congress. Whatever is happening there is replicated in your local community, and that is where the local people can make a difference. If we don't hold them accountable, their lies spread that much further. I think that's an important thing for us to realize. And yes, calling out another Jew is just as legitimate. Bernie Sanders is a Jew, but he is one of the most anti-Semitic, self-hating Jews, and he hates that anyone believes that Jews have a connection to Israel. We have to just keep sharing that truth again and again. Let's get to some of our other questions that have been asked. J.M. Sorrell, hello again. Good to see you with
Hi.
us.
Great to see you again as well. And Rabbi, thank you for everything that you do tirelessly. You know Western Massachusetts a little bit, so you know that it's a really
Yes.
progressive kind of area, quote unquote, which makes it really complicated right now for Jews who are Zionists and progressives and feel politically homeless. There are just as many loud Jews who are kind of gleefully involved with Jewish Voice for Peace, Code Pink, and all the other anti-Semitic organizations. What I wanted to say is that I do a lot of things. You talked about political complexity, and I've always identified as a radical feminist and a progressive, but also very much an independent thinker. I work for the Secretary of Veteran Services, and I'm a veteran advocate. People would not look at my MO and say, wow, she works with veterans, right? I also write an op-ed column in the Daily Hampshire Gazette monthly, and I started writing a lot about anti-Semitism and the falsities around Zionism right after October 7th, naively thinking everyone else would be doing the same thing. No one was doing it. The Jewish voices who I know who are usually really vocal, I failed to realize were living in fear and wondering about being publicly Jewish. And there was a time period of, I think, really natural self-protection. I'm an ally. I'm not Jewish. I identify, I have family members who are Jewish. I have a half sister who's Jewish. But I wanted to speak really clearly today as an ally because there's no excuse for people not being allies in this cause. I'm really clear about it. I don't mind taking on Jewish Voice for Peace. I did when they condemned teaching about anti-Semitism in the Northampton public schools because Shema was coming in and they claimed that Shema was engaged with the ADL. And I remember writing, when was it a bad thing to be associated with the ADL? And more,
Well, I'm
and
very
what,
grateful to you.
but I'm really hopeful that more Jews are now coming, those progressive Jews who are also Zionists are now coming out much more vocally. Early on, they thanked me. I was told I had a Jewish, what is it, neshama, and
Yeah.
and I was invited to a Havurah Hanukkah gathering of progressive feminist homeless Jews, in this we have a synagogue where the Friday night Jews wear keffiyehs to temple.
Unbelievable.
So that's an ongoing fight, and I hope that we can get more tangible information. I encourage people to read Bernard Henri Levy's book or to read Noah Tishby, whatever it is, to educate yourself about what you think Israel is and what it actually is. But it's really an uphill battle right now with Jews who are currying favor with their Goyish friends on the left, to be, in the popular gang on the left. And, they come right out, some of them saying it's the Holocaust in Gaza, it's genocide. And it's heartbreaking. And my Jewish friends who are similar to me are particularly heartbroken by that when it comes from other Jews. Do you think that is a minority and they're just loud, or do you think it's a real problem as a trend? Thank you.
I mean, I am hopeful that it is a minority. I think it still is a minority. Whether it's a trend, we'll see when I think the Gaza war winds down, whether that will start cooling off this sort of red hot trend of progressive Jews finding their religion in progressivism and negating traditional Jewish ideas, practices, and also the legitimacy of the West, because it's all a package. But I just want to say how grateful I am for everything you said and everything you do. And there's a Hebrew phrase, "Kain yirbu." In other words, may there be more like you.
Amen for that. I cannot imagine how being in these places with keffiyeh wearing Jews, uh, it is an impact. And for the rest of you who are joining us, you can please share, do you feel capable, confident of calling them out in that space? Or are you a little bit shy and protecting yourself even because unfortunately, as you said earlier, Rabbi, that people don't feel capable of holding decent conversations with somebody they don't agree with. So as soon as somebody calls out the keffiyeh wearing Jew, they're going to be shouted down. Is the tendency to call them out, hold them accountable?
Yep.
Should there be responsibility in their jobs? Should they hit, or are we quiet? How do we handle it?
I do it so that my fellow Jewish friends don't have to suffer the pain of doing it. I don't mind calling them out. I'm now on this hit list of being a right-wing Zionist. Never been called right-wing in my life.
That's a
We
good
really
hit
don't-
list to be on. I'll take
Welcome
it.
to the club.
I'm too old to care. I'm too old to
Listen,
care.
I only have a few more minutes, so let's get to
Yeah,
Scott.
go.
Because Scott
Sorry.
wants to,
Yes,
Well,
go ahead. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you.
absolutely.
as Ms. Heideman, yeah, well, you remember me from, I've been at a couple of meetings. And, I made a poem which actually very incisively criticized or was an apologetic poem for Israel. But I do more than just poetry. I'm a strange character. I'm considered somewhere on the autistic spectrum. I understand what oppression is. Self-pity be damned. But I do understand oppression, and we're not here to talk about that. But I've researched, I opposed Israel for 4 decades. And then I began to do research. I was lied to. I was connected with the left. Things are getting very scary out there.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you, I want to mention this in passing. They were just busted. There was a shootout in Vermont on 91. A Border Patrol agent was killed. One of the people in the vehicle, they're a radical transgender murder cult called the Zizians because.
Oh, yes, I read about them.
Now,
I read about that.
if
I
you
just read
don't
about
understand what that has to do with anti-Semitism, one thing that I don't even try to do it happens to me. My mind connects dots. I see interconnections and, politics. Of course, there's going to be interconnections. Many of them are obvious once you look. You can't unsee them. I know people in Vermont that I was close to. I said was. They operate more or less a safe house where people go to learn how to shoot, among other things, shoot guns.
I do think cults and conspiracies almost always end up in some kind of anti-Semitic. It's just because so much of anti-Semitism is a conspiracy. And by the way, let me just say, since my daughter is doing her postdoc in autism, I have developed enormous respect for neurodivergence that she has inculcated in me. And when you say you see patterns that other people don't, I 100% believe you. And we are really blessed as a species to have minds that work so many different ways.
And it is, there's a lot of work involved. I mean, I spend more time on my email than I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
But thing is that, and I don't want to we're not here to talk about autism, but I believe that's a categorization. The phenomena are real. We
Yes.
we have
very crude diagnoses.
It's circular. There's no norm. But suffice it to say that their tactics I've picked up, I get into arguments with relatively uneducated or obviously bigoted people. And I do it for a reason.
Yeah.
Because I figure out what is the tactic that is being utilized now. And I could mention numerous little, like lately, what they do is they take these things that happen in the Muslim countries surrounding Israel, most of them, and they say Israel does it. As an example, forbidding intermarriage.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yes.
persecuting
we have to wrap
homosexual.
up. So
Right.
if you have
But
something you want to say before we do, please do.
Well, I'm on Facebook if anybody wants to contact me, because I do have an awful lot. And Ms. Sorrell, I take my hat off to you. Seriously, because the thing is, we need to expose the lies. I believe that we need to expose the lies. We're never going to reach the fanatic people, but we will help erode their power base.
So this is a good note on which to end. Elana asked me at the very beginning, how do we not let them get away with it? Which was Wiesel's principal concern almost throughout his life. And I would say exactly the way that we have all demonstrated. By speaking up, by calling out, by trying to give pusillanimous public figures a little bit more backbone, by letting them know that we are watching them and that we care about what they say and that we notice what they say, by encouraging those figures that do things that we like, even if they do other things that we don't like. In other words, by being genuine advocates for our ancestors and our children. That's how we try not to let them get away with it. So thank you all so very much for being here today.
Fantastic.
Always great to be with you, Elana, and with your peeps.
I think it's so great.
I wish you all
so
strength.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much. What an honor.
Please feel free to contact Rabbi Wolpe. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer
Absolutely.
further questions. You can find him on Instagram and other platforms. And we're really very appreciative for everybody coming together tonight. Thank you. And we hope, of course, that you'll consider making a donation to Israel Forever so that we can continue to bring you programs just like this. And if you're looking for a program for your community, look no further than the incredible database and directory of activities and resources that I have been writing for well over a decade that can be at your fingertips and easily accessible. Things that you can do hands-on in your communities, in your families, with your groups, so that we do not have to be silenced and we can indeed make sure that every hater is held accountable and that we are using our voice to never, ever let them get away with it. Not today, not in the future, not forever. We will make sure that the future generations are confident in Israel's truth and that of the Jewish people. Thank you to all of you for joining, and please be in touch and join us for our next program. And we look forward to having you.
Hey, you know how to say it properly too, probably. Louisville, right?
Louisville. Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Everyone up here says Louisville. They added a syllable. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. And I've seen, however, is there anybody who has anything else that they'd like to add? I've seen some new faces tonight. I know Rabbi Wolpe had to leave us, but I'm happy to stay on if there's any other questions that anybody has that you'd like to share tonight. I see Jill, you're welcome to us. I see you starting to.
No, I was just wondering if I'm assuming you're sharing the recording after this. Yeah.
We'll be sharing the recording, yeah, and we try to make sure that we capture some tidbits so that we can share them with our Instagram community as well. It will be on YouTube as well and on our Spotify, on my podcast, A Jew Today. So it's
that's good. I'll write that one down. Okay.
You can also listen to Rabbi Wolpe's first conversation with me from about several months ago, and it's just very interesting how we always emphasize the need to speak truth to power, and that strength is in each one of us. Whether that is speaking truth to the powerful people in our politics or those even in our personal lives. Sometimes the power that we're resisting against is the power of those lies, the willingness to believe that Israel is, a warmongering country. No, we are fighting for freedom. And these are the kinds of language pieces that we need in order to counter the euphemisms that they continue to say about Israel and Jews. What they say about Israel today, they said about Jews 100 years ago and 500 years ago and 1,000 years ago. And we're a part of that long destiny. And that's what Israel Forever really stands for. So if you're not already a part of a community, please come and join and declare your pride as a virtual citizen of Israel. And yes, we will have the recording available for you. And if you have any requests for other programs, you just let us know. Any other questions from members of our community here? I want to thank you all
I
for
think
your
we
time.
need to emphasize to people very incisively that Israel hits military targets. And the reason they're military targets is because the government of Gaza, Hamas, intentionally.
I think that yesterday's missile fire is a very important example to share on that note. We, of course, it was spread around the world in lightning bolt that Israel had bombed a hospital, and only after the facts then get shared, because the hype comes first, was it announced that such a precision missile, it took out one room of this hospital in Khan Yunis, succeeded in eliminating one of the highest officers in the Hamas network. And so these are the kinds of concrete examples that can be given to show the integrity of Israel's fight for freedom. So on one hand, we need to have the facts and to share them with confidence. And that is one of the very key ways where we can counter the lies of the haters. When it comes to holding them responsible, it does require us to take action to prevent how much lies can have on the people around us, the schools, the communities, the leaders, and that takes every single one of us.
And Elana, I think it's really important to note that Israel has only ever fought wars in defense, as opposed to all the imperialist countries around the world, all the entitled countries that decide they want to take over something else and they fight offensively. And I make that point all the time with people, and they can't argue it. Israel has only ever fought in defense and as response to an attack. And then that kind of silences people and gets them to start to think about that.
I think it's very crucial to remember what Rabbi Wolpe also just mentioned. You'll excuse me, but there seems to be a massive barrage of missiles being fired on the south at this moment. And so I'm just keeping my own ears peeled. We've had sirens nearly every day lately. But Rabbi Wolpe's comment was that we
to make sure. Can you still hear me? Okay. We have to make sure that we expose their motivation. And underlying most people's pro-Palestinianism is an ulterior motivation. And when you push them beyond their catchphrases, that's when we discover that at their core, it's just hard, traditional Jew hatred. And we have to be able to recognize it and to call them out without putting ourselves at risk, but also becoming what I call Israel strong, gaining in our self-defense mechanisms so that people know how they can defend themselves and what kind of legal recourse exists. Most of the parents that I counsel, they will not report anti-Semitic things that happen to their teenagers. They don't want their teenagers traumatized. They don't want to have to go the bureaucracy, and they don't want to ruin their teenager's life in their high school. So most people go quiet, but there are always creative ways where we can hold haters accountable. And that is what my master, Elie Wiesel, truly meant, and what we all have to live up to. We can never let them get away with it. Our lessons today are the lessons for the next generation.
If you don't hit back against a bully and hurt them, and don't even ask what I know about that. But if you don't, and you can't see it, but I'm small and I weigh like 100, right now about 116 pounds, 117 pounds. But if you don't hurt them, they're going to continue.
Small but mighty. Small but mighty.
Well, I'm no fighter, but
Israel and our allies. Jill, I love your idea here. There is actually an organization that's called Allies for Israel, and we partnered with them. There's also the Global Alliance, and there's a few different allied organizations. And we at Israel Forever pride ourselves on welcoming people from all across every spectrum of the political and religious calendars as well.
I think what's really useful are the Western Muslim feminists who really debunk all of
Yeah,
and
definitely.
how radical Islam is making people drunk in the West, stupidly drunk because it's so self-destructive. But those voices are so brave. They're on all kinds of death lists, these women, but they're speaking truth about what radical Islam is, and speaking out about anti-Semitism. If you can get those voices to some of those lefties, especially, I think it really helps for them to be exposed to some of those voices.
It is, and as I said,
Israel,
research them, Brigitte Gabrielle and others, that we can listen. Alicia Laban, if you're not familiar with her, there are also some really wonderful, it's great to have the younger influencers, but the older generation is very eloquent as well. There are some important people, also Israelis, that you can learn from. Follow. I try to be a voice of reason and to share as much of the voices that we respect on our Israel Forever Instagram and Facebook pages. So please do come and follow us and let us know if you have something that you feel needs to be addressed, because we cannot only rely on the public figures. This is a war of our existence. And we absolutely must become those voices ourselves. That's how the nation has outlasted for 3,000 years of attempting to destroy us. And that's how we'll last for however much longer we can, until, of course, Mashiach comes and all of us return to our homeland in Israel and we are blessed with peace. I'm going to close by saying one of the most important prayers that I really believe, because we've talked a little bit here about how important our interfaith connections are in the fight against anti-Semitism. And it does say that, it says about the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, that my house will be a house for all peoples who will be able to come. And that's really true. They're trying to divide us, the Kanye Wests and the all the different haters that are in the podcast series. And they are saying horrible lies about Jews and Judaism, and lying about the Talmud, and lying about the word goy, and lying and lying and lying, because they've learned throughout history, lie enough and people will believe it as truth.
Right.
We need to be the pillars of truth. That is what Israel Forever stands for. And that is why we are so grateful for you being with us. So thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you guys all on our next
You're
program.
incredible. You're incredible, Elana. Be well.
Oh,
Be safe.
goodness,
Please
thank
be
you
safe.
so much.
Yeah.